the special call Board of Adjustment meeting to order. We'll do this, we don't have our secretary here tonight, but I think Mr. Stroud here is going to go ahead and take those duties on. You want to go ahead and take roll?
Where's the list at?
It's just this.
Oh, there it is. Wendell Miller,
Here.
Don Jackmore, Justin Cawthorn, Wayne Cummings,
Here.
Josh Stroud, here.
All right. We do have a quorum, sounds like. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stroud. All right. Okay, we're going to start with our first order of business here. The variance article 3.22.5 design standards regards to wall articulation requirement for 2 feet projection or recess to 5.8 regarding the landscape street buffer. Anyway, Sarah, take it away.
Yes, sir.
You know what I'm trying to say.
Yes, sir.
It's right there in front of me.
So this is an application to vary from Article 3.2 to 0.5, which is the wall articulation, and Article 5.8.4, which is the landscape street buffer. And the plans were reviewed based on the new design prototype that they are proposing at this location. The existing location conditions are that this is the existing and the new location of Hardee's. It is located adjacent to Valley Park Center, PDQ, and the new Chipotle. This is a C2 highway commercial zone with banks, restaurants, and gas stations north of Main Street, and then ConAgra in the M1 light industrial zone to the south along Main Street. I have a few review comments on this. So the applicant has suggested that changes in color or material, corner treatments, or other architectural details are various ways to achieve articulation. The other items identified by the applicant are various ways to state articulation as they mean a change in plane. The Russellville zoning code defines articulation for commercial structures to be a recess or projection of at least 2 feet in depth. And then a little bit better definition is defined by the Institute for Local Government. Articulation is defined as variation in the depth of the building plane, the roof line, or height of a structure that breaks up plain, monotonous areas and creates patterns of light and shadow. And it's the patterns of light and shadow that help break up the plane of the building, helping the building to be more human-scaled and inviting. Article 9.3.2 provides specific guidance to be met in order to approve a request for a variance. This same information will be in the Chipotle application. I may not read as much or go into as depth, but if you'll just consider and remember what we're talking about with wall articulation and the patterns of light and shadow. So the first item we'll look at is applicant demonstrates that special conditions or circumstances exist which are peculiar to the land, structure, or building involved, and which are not applicable to other lands. The first request is a variance to the wall articulation requirement. The requirement is that buildings longer than 50 feet in length shall incorporate wall plane projections or recesses that are at least 2 feet in depth for at least 25% of the facade. As this is a new plat, the property lines could be adjusted by the 1 foot required to allow the required articulation as stated under the Russellville zoning code, although that is not an ideal option. The applicant is stating that the Hardee's plan
That's not an ideal option. Please explain.
They've already done a lot of work on the plat, and so their request is that we wouldn't require them to change the lot line by 1. They're subdividing the property out, and if they were to move it the 1 foot, which would bring them into compliance for the drive aisles on both properties with this articulation requirement, it's just challenging with all the work they've already completed on the properties or on the project. The applicant is stating that the Hardee's plan appears to meet the intent of the code with architectural features, although not meeting the strict requirement of the 2 foot for the 20 or the 25%. So they are using color. As you can see from this image, they're using a couple features that give you that appearance of articulation, even though it's not projecting 2 feet out from the building. So they have the color, that red color, Hardee's. That area is actually higher. It projects about 1.5 to 2 feet higher than the building height for the rest of the building. So this is their new prototype. From what I could find, this is the new prototype that they're proposing for Hardee's. There may be 1 or 2 that have already been built, but it's the new prototype that they're proposing, and that height adjustment is part of what they use for the Hardee's. And then there's also this projected wrap. On the image, it says made from scratch biscuits, charbroiled thick burgers, and that actually protrudes out of the plane of the building, and it wraps along the top, and it wraps both of the entrance doors. So again, it gives it that little bit of look like there's articulation to the building.
So it's not you're saying it's not flat?
It's not flat. It just projects out. It does project out of the building.
The top part.
It's a parapet, basically.
So the top part is a parapet. It projects higher than the main plane. And then that made from scratch, that darkened thing does project out from the building. It is only about 3 inches. Thus, it doesn't meet the 2-foot requirement, but it does break that plane, so it's not a flat wall. And that gives it that.
Too, Sarah, because that's something that Luke had looked at before about metal, design and whatever. I mean, some designs are not going to be what what worked in '97 is not going to work in 2024.
Correct.
So yeah, that's something we might want to look at too. Do you agree?
Yes. And so in here, you'll see that it's got the use of the light and the shadow. You can see shadows along the top and along that charbroiled. And then there's even the little wing coating along underneath the windows that actually protrude out as well to give a little bit of light and shadow to that building. And then although signage is not counted for articulation requirements, they are proposing that blade sign that also does enhance the appearance of articulation. And then the second request is a variance to the width of the landscape street buffer. So for property greater than 10,000 square feet, the requirement is for a 10-foot street frontage buffer. And the intent is to ensure that there is sufficient space for the landscaping to survive. So regardless of... So when we updated the code, we wanted a landscape buffer adjacent to the property line so that your parking lots or your paved area doesn't go right up to the parking lot or to your property line. And so, but we have 2 different allowances, one for smaller lots and then one for larger lots. And this falls under that larger lot requirement where they would need 10 feet for the street frontage buffer. Regardless of articulation and potential adjustments to the property lines, even if we were to adjust a property line and make them do their articulation, there's still a shortfall of 5.3 feet. They could not get any closer to that or any further away from the property line because of all the requirements for the site with the parking and with the drive aisle. So even though we could require the articulation, we're still short 5.3 feet. The good side on this is that typically right-of-ways, there's usually about 11 to 15 feet from the edge of pavement to a property line, and in this case, there's 18.7 feet from the edge of pavement to the property line. So there's still sufficient width for them to meet the planting requirement of the landscape buffer. They're only asking for a reduction to the width, so to go from 10 feet to 4.7 feet. But they're still going to do all the planting because there's still plenty of room once you add in the area of the right-of-way. Yes. So there's 2 more items to consider. Application demonstrates reasons to justify a variance, and the variance is the minimum to make reasonable uses of the land. The applicant could make adjustments to comply with the articulation to meet the drive aisle minimum widths. However, they could not widen the lot to meet the landscaping buffer requirements, and therefore the applicant has demonstrated reasons to justify a variance. And then the other item for review is make a finding that granting the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning code. And although not strict compliance with the articulation requirement of 2-foot projection or recess, the applicant has demonstrated that they are meeting the intent of the regulations and have clearly shown articulation from the ground up with the wrapped projection and parapet height adjustment, with light and shadow being prevalent on the building. So after all of that review, it is staff's recommendation that the Board of Adjustment approve this variance request based on the findings that the applicant demonstrates a clear effort to honor the intent of this provision. The application maintains good civic design and is in visual harmony with surrounding properties. The applicant has demonstrated that special conditions and circumstances exist. The application demonstrates that this request is the minimum to make reasonable use of the land, and all other variance guidelines have been successfully met by the applicant. Are there any questions?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve this variance request. All those in favor, acknowledge by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, hearing none, that motion carries. Put me down as I voted too, okay? All right, second order of business here is variance to Article 2, 3.225. We've heard this before, I guess. Design, I'm sorry, did you have anything on that other one before? Okay, all right. I saw you were on there, but, all right. You can throw a rock at me if it needs to, so. All right. Design standards requiring the wall articulation requirement. Sarah, take it away, please.
Yes, sir. So this is, their only request is a variance from Article 3.22.5 regarding the wall articulation. So this is for our new Chipotle. I just talked about the existing conditions. So they are subdividing this existing Hardee's location into 2 properties. So the same existing conditions apply as we just heard on the Hardee's application.
Since we have a low population here, I'm going to say praise God. If I could say that.
As with the last application, I talked about the wall articulation, the 2-foot requirement by zoning code, but then as that local government articulation, it includes that patterns of light and shadow. I'm not going to go back through this whole slide. So on this, applicant demonstrates that special conditions or circumstances exist which are peculiar to the land, structure, or building involved and which are not applicable to other lands. So the request is a variance to the wall articulation requirement. I went through this on the last application, so I'll skip this one. To add the articulation, the drive aisle between parking spaces would be reduced to 21 feet. So this does meet the minimum requirements of our zoning code. It's just a challenge for extended cab vehicles if it were to be reduced to the 21 feet. The applicant has provided a 6-inch overhang from the top flat parapet wall, however, has not added anything to break up the plane for the flat walls. The top plane is 68 feet long, which is in excess of our code.
Can I interject something real
Yes.
quick? Dave, is that 6-inch overhang thing, of course, I'm a roofing contractor by trade, but that 6-inch overhang thing, is that something we need to is that something we need to look at as far as, I know that designs and, something that Luke Duffield had talked about on the planning commission that we change or that we look at is that we look at new designs and not be closed-minded as far as, what new designs come out. You have metal siding out there. You can't have metal, showing on siding or whatever, but, as designs change, is that something we need to look at too as far as the overhang and all that? Is that something we need to look at too? Is that, is that one of those designs?
To address your question, there were some things that staff identified that would be bringing to the long-range planning committee, some options, some things to consider. 2 feet may not be the correct articulation requirement. The option or the intent is really to not have any flat planes. We do want articulation, but 2 feet may not be the right answer. So yes, staff have identified it as a result of both of these variances and a couple conversations that we've had. I'm not entirely sure what the outcome will be when we get to the Long Range Planning Committee, but that will be something that is covered under the Long Range Planning Committee. Yes, sir. Sorry, Dave. Okay. As I pointed out, that could be a challenge to extended cab vehicles. So then the applicant has provided a 6-inch overhang for the top flat parapet wall, but the plane is still 68 feet long. There's nothing breaking that up. The windows do provide a 2-inch break in plane, but the color for the bottom wall and the windows are the same, so it creates the appearance of a single plane. So the difference between the Hardee's application and this application is there's different uses of color to kind of break up the plane, whereas on this application, it seems to appear as a flat wall. So considering the shadow and light similar to the Hardee's application, the overhang does provide shadowing on the lower half. However, the shadow really matches the color of the proposed bottom wall. The drive-through side has a 5-foot projection for only 17% of the facade. If the variance were only for this side, a recommendation of approval could be given as they are trying to meet the intent. They have a 5-foot projection, it's 17%. It doesn't meet the strict requirements, but it's pretty close. So I think there could be a case for the drive-through side. It's just this long, flat side that absolutely. And then the 2 other items to consider, applicant demonstrates reasons to justify a variance. Staff did not feel that the request for a variance demonstrates that this is the minimum necessary to make reasonable use of the land, as they could still incorporate the required articulation and maintain the minimum drive aisle width in the parking lot if the variance were denied. And then we have make a finding that granting the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning code. The regulations aim to uphold standards of civic design, ensuring visual cohesion, and avoiding aesthetic detractors. The visual facade is unique in comparison to adjacent structures, which could be considered in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the code. So given all of that, although the visible facade is unique in comparison to adjacent structures, it is staff's recommendation that Board of Adjustment deny the variance request based on the findings that the applicant has not demonstrated that special conditions or circumstances exist as alterations to the structure and site could be obtained, and the applicant has not demonstrated that this variance is the minimum to make reasonable use of the land. Yes.
So if it doesn't meet it, like what would your suggestion be on making it work?
Absolutely good question. When the original application came to us for the variance, the bottom picture is what was submitted to staff, but the architectural drawings submitted to staff and after talking with the architect on the project, the top picture is what Russellville is getting. If they were to add some additional articulation, like is shown in the bottom picture, I've seen new Chipotles that have a raised parapet over the entrance, so it would give a little height in the front. So I think there's a couple things that they could do.
Is that what that is on the right? It's kind of like a little walkthrough?
On the right in the lower bottom image is just an inset. I think it's about 3 or 4 inches inset, but it gives that appearance of articulation. So we think there were some things that they could do, but unfortunately that top image is the one that the architect confirmed is being proposed to be built here in Russellville, and so that's where staff ended up with our recommendation. Are there any questions?
Commissioners, what is your pleasure?
Well, I do believe the
Oh, no,
applicant.
Dave, you got something you want to add to that? Okay. Okay.
Leave that picture up if you would.
You up there, John?
Thank you. All right, again, for the Chipotle, just the same as it was for Hardee's. This is their standard model design. Most model designs nowadays are getting smaller, less interior, less dining inside, based because of the apps now we have. So now you have apps that you go through drive-through, you can order and you get discounts to do that. So more people are starting to use drive-through. A few people are now starting to use Uber and other types of pickups. Like when I go to Chipotle, not Chipotle, to the smoothie place for my wife, I wait about 5 minutes, park in the order stall there, run in, it's in a box. I pick it up, grab the receipt, I check it, make sure everything's in it.
That's
and
just
then-
gross.
And I
All right,
walk
so-
out. You know, it's all done. It's prepared, you know, and I'm not waiting in this long drive-through line. So that's what's happening now. That's why we have these smaller footprints. The existing Hardy is pretty big. Now it's going to be small. It's sitting on one lot, and it's very tight to be able to put both of these on there. So with the 5-foot, having to do 2 5-foot landscaping buffers on each side, and then having the 90-degree turn, it's tight. As it is right now, the drive design in the parking lot is 20 feet. It's recommended to be 25. And as you know, larger extended trucks, I mean, how many of you have one? I do, are becoming more and more popular, as well as SUVs. The ladies are starting to buy the long, big SUVs. When you're at 90 degree, 20 feet is tight. So we're tight and trying to keep the Hardee's in line, as well as Chipotle. Hardee's, their parking doesn't meet the recommended either. We're down, we're short on it, even though it's angled parking, but we've done the best we can with it to try to get that to fit within that footprint. And the one thing that we were asking the variance for on that was the 10-foot buffer on the highway side, because they want to keep as much of the existing parking lot as possible. And it's really wide. It's 18-foot wide there, so we've got plenty of room to put the landscaping in there without any problems. So on this, with the design, it's the same. It's a standard model, just like Hardee's is a standard model. Adding 2 feet would cause the drive-through to be smaller. I mean, I don't think we could even get it in there, because right now it's 11. Let's see, we have it at 11 and 12 and a half. Hardee's is 12 and 12. 12 is the recommended. So we could go 12 and 12 on this, which would be the recommended. But they wanted a little bit more in the drive-through part. So we left it at 12 and a half and 11. So we're tight already. So in my opinion, I think, you know, with splitting the property the way we've done it, try to get the best we can out of both, we're creating 2 projects, 2 sites in one, even though we're having to get some variances to make this work. Now, the intent of the standards, okay, when we were looking at our standards, the design standards 322.5, the intent of the standards in the very beginning, first of all, it talks about in the design commercial building code is facade material. Okay, so it goes through and it lists all the different exterior facade material from brick, architectural block. It goes through an aluminum, flash metal paneling, glass will do windows, doors, precast concrete, on and on, wood, tile, stucco, all of that. But when you get then to the part that we are discussing, which is the wall articulation, the wall articulation says buildings shall avoid long uninterrupted facade planes. And remember, the word is facade planes and or blank walls. The intent of that was to keep long walls from being blank, okay? So, right, but in some cases, you have long walls that you can't do a whole lot with, as such in the case of not industrial, but schools, okay? Schools, for instance, a gym wall, classroom walls where you have 4 classrooms, it's a long wall. Right. Right. They have, yeah, and they have like one window, you know, or maybe two windows, or in the case of a gym, no window at all. Well, that's not very pleasant, okay? So the 2-foot then, you know, really should probably work there to kind of break that up, you know? So I think that was the intent of the wall separation, is to be used on larger walls, walls that don't have any features on it, very much, no grouping of windows, or if it just has one door, then to break up that long plane, you would do the 2-foot offset based on the percentage here. And that would work in those cases. I think that would be the minimum design that you would require for something like that. This is not a long plain wall. I mean, this is a restaurant. It's got windows, it's got doors. And when I'm looking at these two, I mean, that's the night version of the top one, is what it is. Yeah, yeah. So, we're on the end there where they have the dark panels by the door, they have the lights, because it lights up the door as you come inside. So it has the light. It has the same sign projection as Hardee's. Let me get back to this mic so it can be recorded. You know, the sign does project out. It's lit up. So at night you have, you know, light and shadow. You have the lights up there above the panel, above the door, can create a shadow. So it's the same. It's exactly the same. That's just the day version. This is the night version. It's what it looks like. The menu. I just like the avocado. This stuff's a little bit spicy for me. But anyhow, my wife loves it. Yeah. And so, you know, with that, when you look at articulation, I mean, yes, the definition that Sarah brought up was from one definition, and there are other definitions out there the same. Here's one that I found. Building articulation is the process of creating more edges and corners on a building by stepping and recessing its exterior walls. You can do that with the windows too, like we have the panel up there. You know, it's breaking it up, basically. You got to break it up, make it look different. The process can help reduce the appearance of large blank walls. That's the intent. You don't want... Right. So, you know, it's the intent is you don't want these huge, long, blank walls. So it can also refer to many design elements that contribute to a building's street frontage, both horizontal and vertical, to create an interesting landscape. So you want it to be interesting, you want it to be inviting, you want it to be friendly. And so by form, articulation can, by form, how a building's surface comes together to design that form, such as treatment as edges, corners, surface articulation of windows, and the visual weight of the building. And then there's the architectural form. The architectural form is differentiating or making different planes through changes in materials, colors, textures, and patterns, developing corners as distinct linear elements, and using lighting to create tones. You know, and then there's the scale, different scales like heights and stuff. The appropriate scale for articulation is often a function of the size of the building and the adjacent public spaces. And then on top of that, once we've said all that about the building, you know, trying to make it inviting, also keep in mind that on the exterior of the property itself, we have landscaping. So we have trees every 50 feet, and then we have shrubs or trees within the buffer zone. So those are going to also kind of shield a little bit of the building at times as they grow.
Yep.
So people are going to see those first and then the building second. When you come in, then you see the building itself. So if we didn't have that code, then you'd see just building. You know, as you're driving by, you see building. But now that we have the landscaping code, you're going to see the trees, the shrubs, and then the building in the background. So for those reasons, for the same definitions and same reasons that Ms. Sarah had articulated on the Hardee's for approval, I feel like this building also meets the same criteria.
Okay.
And so we're asking that you approve the variance.
Got you, bro. All right. Commissioners, you have any questions for Dave or Sarah? Mr. Mayor, you have anything to add in on this one? You good? Okay. All right. Talk to me, gentlemen.
I move that we approve the variance request.
Okay, we have a motion to approve.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve this variance request. All those in favor acknowledge by saying aye.
Aye.
Put me down as a vote too. And Sarah, you have anything else? If we have no further business, we are adjourned. I'm getting good at that. I know how to-